The following lesson is from Project Management Professional version 4 PMP 2009 Learn Smart video training. To find out how you can get unlimited access to our entire Learn Smart video training library, call 1-800-418-6789.
A good project manager knows that projects don't just happen in some haphazard fashion, nor do they occur in a vacuum. To do well on the exam, you'll need to understand how projects flow from beginning to end. There is a specific sequence. You'll also need to know what else affects projects. There are lots of things in your organization and some things outside it. You'll need to know it all, and we're going to cover it now.
PMI defines the sequence of events from a project's beginning until its end as the project life cycle. Every project has a life cycle, and the order or the sequence of events is largely the same. Once again, it's not necessary that every project flow through the exact same number of processes, but the order in which they flow are basically the same. The life cycle can also be defined as the phases of a project from its beginning to its end. The transition from one phase to another, whatever we define a phase as being, we'll get into that a little bit later, but the transition from one phase to another is generally defined by some sort of handoff. In many cases, it is a technical or administrative handoff. For example, you may move from one phase to another when you have met a milestone or completed some part of the deliverables. Let's assume we're building fast food restaurants. One part of the project may involve acquiring a prefabricated building. The next phase may be transporting the prefabricated building to the final location. Well, you'll know you move from one phase to another when you can say, I have received the prefabricated building and I'm ready to transport it. There's a specific handoff where you go from acquisition or procurement to transportation. You know exactly when that happens. The phases are generally sequential. Now, I say generally because sometimes the phases are iterative. You may revisit a phase more than once. Now, the way that projects flow, the resources that are allocated to the project and necessary for the project are generally very low at the beginning. They peak in the middle because that's when you're doing most of the work and you need the most people, you need the most additional resources to do the work of the project. And they drop off near the end because you have completed the bulk of the work, and as the project reaches its final phases, it starts to wane in the resources that are necessary. Likewise, the stability of a project increases along with the cost of changes as a project moves toward completion. For example, in the very beginning of a project, making a change to the specification and getting everyone to agree to it is fairly low impact. I mean, there may be some arguments going on back and forth, but it's not going to have a huge impact. You're not going to end up wasting a lot of money. Let's say that in our continuing example of building fast food restaurants, you decide at the beginning you're about to build a restaurant and you want to increase the number of stalls in the restroom. That's something that actually happened in Florida state law. Without getting into too many of the details, the bottom line was that the Florida state legislatures required business owners to modify their restrooms in many cases. There was one business owner in particular that did use prefabricated buildings, and it turned out they had to actually make their restrooms larger to comply with the law. Well, for all of the restaurants that were already built, that was a huge expense. But for the restaurants that had not yet been built, it was far easier and less costly to just add the additional stalls. So that's an example of how as a project moves through time, it's much more expensive to make changes. That's yet another good reason why you want to really hammer down your specifications as early as possible. It'll save you large sums of money. Likewise, the influence of the stakeholders, the people that have the biggest stake in the outcome of the project, the influence is the highest at the beginning because they can affect change easier. As you move toward the end of the project, change is more difficult and the influence of the stakeholders actually goes down because they have very little influence at the very end on making any type of changes. Everything is pretty well, if not set in stone, it's getting pretty close. Well, let's talk about the stakeholders. Who are these stakeholders? PMI defines the stakeholders as being any individual or organization that has an active interest in the outcome of a project or are actively involved in the project. Those include people such as the project manager, obviously a stakeholder, the customer, the person or organization that the project is attempting to satisfy. The performing organization is also a stakeholder. That would be the organization that runs the project, that produces the product or the service. The project sponsor is another big stakeholder. Now, this is a special stakeholder. The project sponsor, or sometimes called the project initiator, is the person or the organization or group of people who initiate the project and provide the initial funding and the authority for the project to continue. It has to be someone or some group of people who hold budgetary authority that can actually provide the money for the project itself. The project team and anyone else who have an active involvement or interest in the outcome of a project would also be called a project stakeholder. So there's lots of stakeholders. Pretty much anybody who is affected by the project would become a stakeholder. Projects do not exist in a vacuum. Projects always exist in some larger context. Most of the time, projects are run within the context of a larger organization, although it is possible for the project organization to be the whole organization. In that case, though, there is a larger context, and it's important for the project manager to be aware of what's going on around the project that influences and affects the way the project is actually managed. For example, organizational systems. The way that your organization is structured depends on whether you derive most of your income from projects or if the project is just a little piece of the larger context. For example, a consultant, construction contractors, government contractors, in many cases, live by the project. On the other hand, larger organizations, such as manufacturing firms, do not derive most of their income from projects, but projects play an important part. In the case of a manufacturing firm, most of their income is derived from manufacturing a product, operational activities. But research and development, to develop a new product that will be put on the operational line, is extremely important, and that would probably be organized as a project. In addition to the organizational systems, you have to understand the culture and the style of the organization. That would come into play when you're dealing with issues such as organizational beliefs, the shared values, the overall tone of an organization, the authority, how authority is viewed. Is it a strongly hierarchical approach, or is there more of a collaborative approach? Those type of culture and stylistic issues can have a huge impact and have to be brought to the attention of the project manager. In short, you have to be able to be savvy and understand the environment in which you're working. And lastly, you need to understand the organizational structure itself. Now, organizational structure defines how the project operates within the organization. Let's take a closer look at the three main organizational structures, at least with respect to project management. The first is the classic organization. It's a functional organization, and it's called the functional organizational structure. It's basically a hierarchy of departments. You have upper management. Each manager may manage or handle one or more departments, and then the departments are organized by function. You have accounting, you have distribution, you would have manufacturing, and each department would have a functional manager. When you're working in a functional hierarchy, the project manager has to be savvy at dealing with and motivating and sometimes influencing the functional managers, because the workers that will be part of the project team actually don't work for the project manager, but rather they work for their functional manager. The next type of organizational structure is the opposite. It is the projectized organizational structure. That is a much newer type of structure in which there are no functional boundaries. The assignment of resources, the assignment of people to groups is based on the project need at the time. The project manager is the direct manager for the people involved in the team, and the people would be associated with the project until the project ends, and then they would either go directly to another project or perhaps go into a pool waiting to be assigned to a new project. There are positives and negatives to this type of approach, but it's typically great for project managers because you pretty much call the shots.